Hi, everybody, and welcome to We'll Talk with Artists. My name is Martha Campbell, and I'm MFA's Communications Manager. Our digital discussion tonight is with found object artist Linda Popp. Linda is a Baltimore-based artist who supervises art education students at Towson University. She creates narrative found object assemblages using artifacts and symbolic objects to convey stories about relationship with family, place, love, faith, and self. I would also like to introduce the host of our show, Will Scott. Will is an art historian with an extensive career as a photographer, and he's the recently retired head of adult programs for the National Gallery of Art. Will is on MFA's board of directors, and he is uniquely qualified to help bridge the gap between artists and the public.
Martha, thank you for your continued help. It's been very valuable and helped make this a successful program. And Linda, thank you for agreeing to subject yourself to this trial by fire. Although as an experienced educator, I know that this is actually, I hope, going to be fun for both of us. Your work, though, is interesting and complex in the way that you assemble it and the complex meanings you're able to reference through the assemblage. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to be working primarily in assemblage?
Okay, well, I haven't always been an assemblage artist. I actually have my master's in printmaking. I did my first found object assemblage early 2000s, and it was a prototype for a lesson in my Art 2 class at Towson High School. And the kids were working on these just intense portraits and self-portraits, and they were exquisite and very realistic, and everybody was just so focused. And I don't know, I just felt like they were too tight. They were getting too tight, and I wanted to shake them up a little bit. So I presented the problem of use found objects to create a portrait of a person that you've had a long-term relationship with, because I didn't want them going to their junk drawer and making a piece about their boyfriend, and then they get in a fight in the middle of it and throw it down the stairs. But anyway, and it could also be a pendulum clock because of the time elements. Well, they all made clocks, and we assigned it at around Thanksgiving so they could do research and interview the person or interview family members for stories. And then every Monday was clock day, so they could gather up tchotchkes over the weekend and bring them in. And it just really was so powerful. I got hooked. I mean, I made my first piece about my mother, and I think back about a painter. When a painter is painting a landscape, they have a different relationship with that place than someone that's just walking along. And I think that's what these assemblages did for myself and for the students.
Well,
So,
you've introduced a couple of very interesting ideas that I was not thinking of in relation to your work before. But before I ask you about those things, can you just say a little bit about how you got to that point in your life and career as a teacher? Were you always interested in the arts? When you got your teaching degree, was art making, teaching art the focus of your degree programs?
Speed dating version. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, and I had an Illinois teacher training scholarship, and that's what got me through school. I found out that it was good for 4 years. So I finished my bachelor's in 3 and went right into grad school. Don't ask me how I even knew about doing that. With an emphasis in printmaking. And then I moved to the Baltimore area, got a job with Baltimore County Public Schools, and just fell in love with teaching art. I knew it was what I was meant to do.
Did you create art for exhibition during the time that you were primarily a teacher?
Not as much as I do now because I was focused on being the consummate
Yeah.
art teacher. I was a
Uh-huh.
single mom, life happens. So, I felt that my art making informed my teaching informed my art making. I was doing both, but obviously the emphasis was on the teaching.
Sure. And so when did you become a member of the MFA and start exhibiting with us?
It was, I want to say around 2007. I sort of looked it
Mhm.
up because a friend sent me a thing saying, Linda, here's information about this Eye of the Beholder exhibit. I think you might want to
Yeah.
apply for that. And I did. And I got in and I was like, damn, okay.
Well, that's a great story. And it's interesting too, because that's about the time I started to exhibit with the MFA. And I don't remember how I found it. I think it was because I knew the Circle Gallery was there and that was the link. But I also got into the first exhibit that I submitted to. And I thought, oh, well, maybe this is a place I can fit in.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Okay, well, back to what you were saying about how you got your students to prepare. One thing you said that just almost hit me like a slap in the face was that their work was too tight. Now, I think that's a really interesting concept, that a conventional portrait was too tight. So how does that relate to being an assemblage artist?
I think their focus at that level was to be very realistic. And I get it. I mean, that's very powerful when you're 15 years old and you can create a very realistic representational portrait, self-portrait. But sometimes I kind of question the creativity that's involved in that.
Bingo.
And that's the
Bingo.
piece.
That's what I was thinking you might say. So do you think that being an assemblage artist is, and this is kind of putting you on the spot because we have so many wonderful painters and photographers and everybody, is an assemblage artist, does that require a higher or more complex kind of creativity than being?
Oh, that's a tough question. I will
my
say
job.
this. I'll say this though, in that regard, for the longest time, since so many of my friends are painters, and we'd go on vacation and they'd all be painting away and I'd be gathering up stuff, and I always sort of felt like a second-class citizen, truly.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until one of those painters who I hold in high regard said to me, Linda, I can't do what you do. I don't know how you do that. How can you do that? And I was like, whoa, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a different way of looking at things and possibility, seeing possibilities.
I don't think I could even imagine doing what you do. So I second that motion. Now, a couple of the other things that you said about your about your work when you were describing what you were trying to get the students to do, and I think this applies to you too, and that is that you mentioned you wanted them to do research and that you wanted them to interview the people that they were going to represent. Is research and sort of digging deeper and getting to know your subject part of what you think you're doing on a regular basis in your own work?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the people I'm getting to know more is myself. Through the deep thinking that's involved, whether you're doing a piece about a place or about nature or your faith. It's very, I'm up here in the studio and I'm laughing and I'm crying and it's very therapeutic.
Now, speaking about your studio and this idea of researching, we talked a little bit about you showing the viewers, the participants, what your studio is like and some of the materials that you've gathered. And after we do that, we'll start to look at your individual works.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna do a little 360 here. Okay, I just have to figure out how to switch the camera. There we go. And I'll move slowly so I'm not giving you motion sickness. But I am the recycling queen, and so you can see I have all these little containers with labels, and I have lots of artwork, lots of my work up, little drawers, and everything's labeled. This cabinetry was already here, but I have bins and containers and shelving, and I love these little carts. I'll do an ad for Michael's that I got from Michael's because they can roll around. And I'm up on the 3rd floor, and it's just my own space. It's a hot mess, but I love it. This is my work, one of my work tables. I have 2 in-progress pieces as per your request.
Can you sort of bring one of those over or go over to it, and we can just, you can give us a quick overview of what you're doing?
Well, this is fun because sometimes my work starts with the object. And in this case, it was this little bitty oven thing that I got at a yard sale. And then which made me think of little girls. And I think the working title, I often start off with a working title, is Sugar and Spice and Everything Nice. I'm thinking of the dreams of little girls and the roles that women play. So of course, in light of recent developments, I have my pearls over here.
Okay.
So that could be part of it. And I've gathered up a lot of different little figures. Look at this. This is so totally outrageous. And it fits right on top. And it's an ashtray. And her legs move and the fan moves. I mean, is that outrageous or what?
I'm old enough to remember those being on bars.
Oh, gosh. And then this is another one that I'm working on. Boop, boop, boop. There we go. This was a wild sort of shaped container. And at the same time I found that container, I also found this hairnet ad.
Oh, wow.
And this one is going to be about, wait, I got my working title, You Are More Than You See. Thinking about, inner beauty of women. And I know one of the pieces that I've shared is your children see their history in your face. Okay.
Linda, why don't
Yeah.
why don't you go back to your chair and let's pull up that piece that you just mentioned.
Okay.
And then we'll sort of start going through the slides. I want to begin with this question because you've mentioned having working titles.
Yep.
Do those working titles come up more or less simultaneously with the first object that sort of starts you on the process for one work? And do they change if you pick up different pieces or sort of start to get different ideas about your original conception?
It's rare that they change. The working title gives me my intention for the piece. The piece is always a narrative. And so that story is important, the most important aspect of the work to me, maintaining that story. So oftentimes my working titles come from songs, a lyric in a song, or a line in a poem, or from a book. This piece, Your Children See Their History in Your Face. I think I'm old. And I, like most women, worry about the lines and the creases and all that kind of stuff. And I read this line in a poem, and I was like, oh yeah, it's my face is important.
Yeah.
My child sees her history in my face. Um, and so that got me thinking about that. This piece was kind of fun because I think it's a jewelry box. There's a mirror there on the bottom, and it had these little loops. And I tried to keep that. I didn't want to hide the fact that it was this jewelry box. I wanted to work with what was there.
When you say that you hear a line in a song or something like that, I'm guessing that it could also be a passage in a book you're reading or a
Yes.
poem or things like that. That sounds very much like I've heard songwriters and poets describe the way that they develop their work. So can you hear, say, a line in a song, and does it sort of stick in your head for a week, a month, a year before it turns into something, and maybe it doesn't turn into anything at all?
Oh, I have hundreds of lines from songs. It'll be like an earworm where, it's like, okay, yes, it's almost like it's speaking to me. That's the story I need to tell next. When I first started, I did a series about family, and about 7 pieces. And then I was like, well, and they were about individuals. And I thought, well, I can't just keep doing this. So it was a Keb Mo song called There's More Than One Way Home. And I was like, yes, that's where I need to go. It's like just staying connected with family. And that was how I sort of developed beyond just those.
Yeah, so one piece can actually lead into another. Maybe okay. Well, let's look at this piece closely, because while you were speaking, I couldn't help but look, and I see some things I recognize, and I want to see if I think if I'm right about it, and then maybe you can lead us through the others. At the very bottom, is that a little, that orange and red thing? Are those bobby pins or something?
Well, there's little lipsticks, and then there's little bobby pins.
Yeah,
and
garter snaps.
Garter snaps, and I think my mother, being a beautician, has a lot with the attention on the combs and the brushes and all that kind of thing for me. But you can see on the left side there's a woman's hair comb. On the right side there's a girl's little Girl Scout beret. So I'm kind of looking at adult women and the things that we do to keep our youthful appearance. But then the bottom line is we shouldn't really worry about it, because we've earned those lines and wrinkles. And through the process, I thought of myself as the daughter. I thought of my daughter. I thought of my mother as a daughter. And at the top in that Jacob's ladder, there's pictures of my mother and her sisters, and myself as a teen, and my daughter as a young girl. You can't see them because of the position, but under the little straps of the Jacob's ladder, they're in there.
Okay. So a piece like this, you've selected things because they make a reference to you and your family, your ancestors and your descendants. Do you think there's a specific way that this has to be read, or is it open to each of us, each person who sees it, to their own reading and connection?
Bam! That's what I love about this, because somebody will come up and say, oh my gosh, that made me think of, and it's something from their story. And it's like, to me, that makes a whole another level of meaning in my work. it's like, yes, I start off with personal, but even in the process, I go beyond me. And I start thinking of all women and all women, mature women, and our concerns for aging, but yet just let it go. We're loved by our children, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I think it's just fascinating, and I appreciate you saying how you think that everybody connects to it in a very personal and individual way, because I don't think that any meaningful art can not do that. If it has to be your way, you're the artist, and it's only this way, I'm not sure that art's really the right place for you.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I feel the same way about my photographs. I'm fascinated when somebody looks at one and says something to me that I never even thought of. And that's part of what I feel helps me grow as a person, and an artist. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I never tell all of my stories.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, because then when you would look at it, you'd say, well, that's Linda's whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I prefer you to say, oh, that reminds me of my mother's or my sisters or my aunts or whatever.
Yeah. I've always found, being an art historian who then has tried to create art, that the art historian too often wants to tell you this is what a work of art means. And it's very liberating and much more, I think, stimulating intellectually and emotionally to create something that people react to. And now we have a relationship. I'm not telling somebody what they should think or feel when they look at my photographs. So let's look at another of your pieces. We have 3 or 4 more that, and I want to have time for you to share all of them with our viewers, our participants. This is just formally fascinating, partly because I'm interested in images of nature as well, but I cannot decipher this entirely by myself. So would you mind walking us through the different pieces a little bit?
Well, and I have it right here in front of me. Actually, it's a little checkerboard box, travel checkerboard box, small. And I attached that wooden furniture piece, and it just sat there forever because I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then Howard, my significant other, happened to bring home a skull that he found in the woods.
Because he thought you'd like to have a skull, right?
And he knows me. I did like to have a skull. And I just set it in there, and it was like a perfect fit. And it sounds a little spooky, but sometimes that happens where I feel things come to me. And then he also gave me that hornet's nest, the 2 things on the right.
Yeah.
And I'd never even seen anything like that before. But they were just almost like this tissue, and I just loved the texture of them, and I loved how one sat inside the other.
You know, they're paper.
Yeah. And then the other pieces, now the gym is closed, so I've been going on these morning jogs, and we've been through a whole change of seasons now. And this summer, I did a lot of little nature pieces. And this piece I finished just a week or so ago. And I was noticing when I was out walking and jogging, it's the quiet of the winter.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the whispers in the winter woods would be the birds, few birds left that might be eating those berries, or and there's a feather behind, and the deer stepping on the pine needles on the floor of the woods. And now this is really creepy. So the white fur that's on the left in the bottom, I'm out, I think I'm running. I mean, but it's probably a senior shuffle. Anyway, I'm zooming right along and I see this little white fluff on the road. And I went, oh, wow, look at that great texture. And I pick it up and I look to my left and there's a dead deer. Like it had been hit by a car. And I was like, I freaked out. I threw it on the ground. It went running. And I was like, well, wait a minute. That was brought to me for a reason. Go back. And I always have a plastic bag. So I picked it up with the plastic bag and I brought it home and there it is.
I have a picture of a dead raccoon with a snarl on its lips. So this resonates with me. I encourage you to continue to do that. But now you've gotten close to my biggest question, thing I can't recognize at all. It looks like an egg on its broad end, but what is that?
I don't know. It's a very textured.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. It looks kind of like a seed that's very weathered. I'm not exactly sure what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you were asked by an art historian to sum this up, what does this assemblage represent?
To me, it represents the quiet of the winter in the woods.
Okay. You get to say whatever you want.
Thank you.
I think it's beautiful, the textures and the colors. There's sort of a palette that you've put here that's accentuated by the red and a little bit of sort of gold up near the top. That's a beautiful piece. Let's look at the next one that we have queued up, okay? Wow, this is like the whole world.
Yes, it is.
Your little assemblages. So does your family history come from Russia or Central Europe?
Nope.
Well, you're going to have to break this down for us then, because I can't.
Well, I think I made this over this past year. And I think a friend gave me those little Asian slippers that are up at the top. And that's where I just loved them. And I thought I have to do something with this. And then I happened to get this box. I don't know what it could have been used for. It has all these little compartments, but they're just a weird arrangement. And, I have a bin that's labeled cultures. And I thought, I do something. And then I think this summer, with things being so divisive, and my heart was breaking.
Well, if I could read through it then and ask you about a couple of things. Do I see a very small dreidel under the slippers?
Yep.
Okay, and the two figures, the sort of older couple, they look like they're figures lifted out of a Chagall painting.
I know, and they're like, I think they're iron or lead figures. They're very heavy, and
Really?
they've been sitting there on my work table, because I think when I was doing this, I was thinking of different cultures and how we should, support each other. And then all of a sudden I looked over and I was like, well, old people have dreams too. We should support them. Sometimes we think they're invisible, and then they just fit in that spot.
Okay, and then that round thing that's red around the edges, is that a dream catcher or a?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So you have Native American, and you have what looks like a mass card or something in the lower.
That's from 1944. And it has all these different cultures represented in that mass card.
Wow.
And there's also a piece of fabric that a student gave me she's from Haiti, so it's from her country. The little footprint is my daughter.
Oh,
She's from Chile, so that was representing her culture.
Uh-huh.
And the hand next to it is my nephew's wife, who's Eastern Indian, and she had henna on her hand for the wedding. So I was just trying to represent
Sure.
all these different cultures and how we could all just come together in a beautiful way and create something exciting and new.
Yep. Well, I think that's what it said to me about the multiculturalism for sure. There was a question that came that I saw pop up on my screen through the chat. At the very bottom, there are what look almost kind of like tokens of some kind with, I guess it's Chinese or Japanese characters. What are that? What are those things?
I think they're from a game. I'm not really
Oh, okay.
sure. It was one of
And
those things that somebody gave me.
do you know if they're Chinese or Japanese characters?
No, I don't.
Doesn't matter really. It speaks to
Asian,
Asian.
yeah.
Okay, and then there was one other question that well, not so much a question, but a comment. There seems to be a use of the basic colors of red and green throughout, and it actually gives a kind of coloristic unity. Was that intentional as you went along?
Nah.
Nah.
It just sort of happened, or I think, as I'm making choices about what to put where,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not even consciously, I'm selecting colors.
So it's the narrative that drives everything.
Absolutely.
And then the only sort of formalistic element that you might be thinking about is how the things can fit into the space you've given yourself.
I would agree with that. Yep.
Yeah. So you're really driven by the narrative.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So you are, in fact, a very compelling storyteller. So let's look at the next story. This one I can't even begin to read. So help me.
Okay. It's called Bartender Blues, James Taylor. I need four walls around me to hold my life. And that was an earworm for me. And so I did a piece called I Need Four Walls Around Me to Hold My Life, thinking about the homes I've had, the places that felt like home, how important that is to us. And then once I did that one piece, I thought, well, I can't just do that one piece. So I broke it down.
Uh-huh.
And this is my home with my daughter in Towson. So looking specifically at that, what home meant to me and the home I created. The neighbors called it the fun house. It was all full of color and art, and we had a garden, and I painted sticks on the furniture, and had an antique bed in the garden in the backyard, and it was a flower bed. Come on. But then also it's on sort of stilts, and that's from the book Einstein's Dreams, where in one of the worlds, people felt they lived their best life. They felt they lived the longest, the farther they were away from the center of the earth. So I put that whole construction on stilts.
And are the stilts, is that a croquet?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. And what's the white thing on the far right?
It's a piece of furniture.
Like the leg of a chair or a table?
Something, yeah, maybe a chair leg, and then there's a branch.
Yeah, okay. All right, I could read all of that then, except for the piece of furniture. And I noticed that there are two little party horns, those tin party horns.
The fun house.
The fun house. Okay, well, that's great. All right, let's go on to the next one. I do want to leave at least 10 minutes for our guests to ask questions. This, on one level, is pretty straightforward compared to the other things we've looked at. But again, you got to break it down piece by piece for us, at least the major elements, if you can.
Well, it's got the stilts again, because I think, we need to build a sheltered nest for children. And I think the stories of locking children in cages, and also there's children in foster care that need adoption. And I was just thinking of children, and I often use birds to represent people. And so when I heard this line, they need a sheltered nest, I think it was a hymn actually. And I had this lampshade, and it's a lampshade frame.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden it became like, well, I could weave in that.
Mhm.
And just like a bird weaves a nest. And a friend sent me information, excuse me, about this one artist that used these bell jars. And that stuck in my brain for a long time. So when I had this lampshade, it was like, I wonder if a bell jar would fit on top of that, and I could create a whole wonderful little world inside the bell jar. So that's what, and I actually have a real artifact, which is a little vase in there, a little flower pot that my daughter made for me, and it says Mom on it. And there's baby shoes hanging from the inside.
So this is really about childhood and family and the way
Right.
families protect their children, or should.
Yep. Or should. And
Now,
how,
go ahead, you finish.
and I was going to say, and how there's children that need a sheltered home. They don't have one and they need one.
And hopefully right now, they're going to find more help with that than they did recently.
Yes, please.
Oh, I see a fellow Schroeder Cherry is listening in. Do you know Schroeder?
Yes, I do. We have a wonderful connection in that he was that very first assemblage that I made. Part of it was inspired by an article in School Arts Magazine called, I think it was Collaborative Connections. And Schroeder was the artist that was sharing his work with the students. And then it was their work in response to him.
Right, he's a very fine fellow. I met him years ago at the National Gallery. And yes, so I'm very happy to see that he's joined in, and very, very good for you to have a friend like that, a colleague like that. I think we added one more earlier piece, which is next. So let's take a quick look at that, and then we'll open it up for as many questions as we can squeeze in.
Well, this was a very early piece, 2007, and it was still when I was doing create a portrait of a person that you've had a long-term relationship with. But I put this one in because to me, it really permanently made me understand the power of this. I mean, it totally changed my relationship with my Uncle Stanley. That's his chair, is the pendulum. He is the family matriarch. Was a bachelor living on the farm with my grandmother, and I thought he hated us. But then as an adult, I realized, well, give me a break. His sisters would all come home with their tribes of children in the summertime, and his house was just like crazy. And then I interviewed him so I could do this piece about him. And I said, how come I never knew these stories about you? And he said, because you never asked.
Yep. Yep.
And it totally changed our relationship. He knew I was honoring him, and his stories would not be forgotten. This piece, my nephew's son has this piece. So those stories will remain in the family.
Well, I think that for me is a very sort of moving thought, because I only had two uncles and moved 1,000 miles away from them when I was 5. So I never really knew either of them. only what my mother would, they were her brothers, would tell me about them. So I think you're really doing something here that is pretty substantial and profound and moving. And I congratulate you on doing that. And now let's take the little bit of time we have left to see, I can think of a million more questions, but let's let our audience jump in now. Martha,
So if
you're
hi, yeah.
the moderator now.
I get to talk to you guys again. If anyone wants to ask a question or anything, again, you can just raise your hand. You can click one of the reaction buttons, the raise hand button, and we'll just try and keep an orderly system. If you also want to see an image again, I can pull up a bigger form of it, but I'll let Linda and Will kind of call for that. If you all want to see one, though, please do. So if there's any questions, you can go ahead and type them out, raise a hand, whatever you want to do.
Martha, you can see everybody, right? I can only see part of the audience.
I can see everyone that can fit on one page, and most
yeah.
everyone else on the second page has their camera off. So I am going back and forth, and I'm looking for all you guys.
Oh, okay. Well, there are a number of things in the chat. Why don't you take a look at those and maybe start from the top if they are questions.
So Paula Stern asked earlier what your favorite glue product is. It seems like you might need a lot of that.
Actually, I try to screw or nail things as much as possible. I want them to be archival. I think that's real important. But if I found marine goop, I figure if it's holding a boat together, it should be holding my sculptures together okay. And I use that E600 or 6000 from Michaels. But I never have anything like that's hanging off the bottom, just glued on.
Yeah, well, that's an important point.
Yeah.
So I was doing something else, and I'm sorry if you already talked about this, but someone named Schrodner Cherry asked what artist inspires you?
Ooh. Well, I've always been, of course, from Chicago. We were very lucky to have Joseph Cornell boxes, sculptures right there. So that was inspirational. But truly, I think I'm more inspired by women narrative artists. Kathy Kalwitz was my first love. I remember crying at an exhibit of hers in DC. And then Betty Saar and our own Baltimore's own Joyce Scott. I mean, such authentic, powerful stories these women tell. They're my inspiration.
I'm going to jump off of Schroeder's question. I resisted doing this because I thought there was so much that you had to tell us. But how about Kurt Schwitters, who was really, you're not familiar with his work?
No, I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, I think you'll find it interesting. So, all right, let's go back to our audience's questions.
We have a question from Joanne Bear, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Do you ever make sketches of your ideas before assembling your objects?
No. I often will do like an idea matrix to explore ideas, but no, I don't do sketches of the actual sculptures themselves. I never know what the end's going to look like. I never know until it's completed, and the story is complete, and visually it's interesting, and a sense of unity. It's structurally, it's sound, but until it's finished, I don't know what it's going to look like.
I did see, Martha, that Chris Fowler, who usually has good questions, just popped one asking Linda to say a little bit about how her work has changed over time. And I think that's a very interesting question. So if you can quickly do that, Linda.
I think over time I'm allowed myself to take more risks. I've had more layers. I think once I stopped making a clock, I didn't have to worry about leaving the space for the clockworks to show. And I've come to realize that, you know, if the viewer doesn't get all the layers of the story, that's okay. I got to experience the layers of the story. So sometimes I actually pretty much bury things in layers, but I know they're there.
I think I misunderstood or misread Chris's question. He really wanted to know how you had changed through your art over time, I think.
Oh, I think I've learned more about myself. I mean, I have a friend that told me her therapist said that she should make a self box to learn about her feelings more. And I think through my art, I'm very in touch with my feelings, and know about myself more. And
So
sometimes
it's a process of discovery about yourself and your world.
Yes. Yes, learning about myself and the world. And I learned the importance of the relationship in many cases. I've learned to forgive, because they're not all positive stories. You know, when you're this old, you don't get, it's not all positive. So I'm not afraid to explore the fears and the negative stories. And I've learned from that.
Yeah. Well, Linda, I think your art has given me, and I hope our viewers, a lot to think about, and we'll be on the lookout for more of it in the MFA shows. And it's a very enriching art, if I could say, and very thought-provoking art. So I really appreciate you agreeing to this interview, and we've sort of run out of time. If anybody still has questions or questions come to mind, please send them to us at the MFA, and we'll do our best to get you an answer. But thanks to everybody who participated tonight, especially Linda and Martha, for making this all work. All right.
Always have to
everybody.
say now.
All right. Thank you. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.